Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable where we answer even more of your questions. This is not a full-size roundtable, it's just a table for two. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by the illustrious Katherine Mangu-Ward, editor of All Things Reason. Happy Thursday, Katherine.
Howdy, Peter.
Okay, on this week's episode of Table for Two, we're going to talk about libertarians and taxes. Two things that go together like, I don't know, Fernet and anything else. What's the ideal libertarian tax policy? And given that we don't live in an ideal world, what should we do instead? We actually have two questions about this. This one comes from Jeff. I would like to know why so many libertarians and conservatives want to get rid of the income tax. Set aside whether or not taxation is theft, and discussions of the size of government assume that we will have at least some government, Katherine, anarchist, and that government must be paid for. Well, Republicans don't seem to assume that. I do not see the income tax being more onerous or harmful to the economy or to liberty than any other kind of tax. Katherine, why do you hate the income tax?
First and foremost, I hate it because it's a tax, of course. But I think that there are reasons to object to the income tax specifically. First, it's important to remember we didn't always have it. The income tax is relatively late breaking. In this here republic, we used to fund the government other ways, primarily tariffs, but not exclusively. Here's the main thing. I think the income tax is taxing productivity. You are taxing something you want people to do, which is work. And the disincentives that creates, both in terms of what you end up with bureaucratically, right? So you end up with people keeping their work to part-time, keeping their income below a certain level, doing all kinds of shenanigans to avoid being taxed at certain rates. Manipulating your work in order to sneak into different government boxes is bad. It also disincentivizes saving and investing because those are all ultimately kind of downstream from work, which is taxable. And I got a lot more, but I'll just add the last bit, which is like privacy and surveillance. The IRS is up in your business because they need to know your income. There's lots of incentives to hide it. And the IRS is therefore Inspector Javering its way into your life to try and find the money you don't want them to know you earned.
If you tax something, you get less of it. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that, but it's not that much more complicated than that. So if you tax income, you get less of it. Income, like Katherine said, equals work, but it's also wealth. It's earnings that you have made for yourself. And so if you are taxing income, then you are taxing the earnings that people have made for themselves, and you're going to get less of it. Our next question, also on taxes, comes from Thomas, who writes, out of control spending is the norm and has been for a long time. Will we, or have we, reached the point where we need not be so insistent on reducing the deficit with cuts alone? Seems like a political impossibility. Wouldn't it be fiscally responsible to demand tax increases, or at least no further tax breaks, like tips and overtime credits, which were recently made tax-free as part of the Big Beautiful Bill? Or maybe that's just as unrealistic. So, Katherine, given that we have this huge budget deficit, and the budget deficit for people, it's not a measure of spending, it's a measure of the gap between spending and revenue. We've not been able to cut enough spending to close that gap. Isn't the fiscally responsible thing to do to raise taxes?
Yeah, I think you and I disagree a little on this, so we should probably fight about it.
All right.
And I think that that way lies madness. I am, of course, in favor of eliminating loopholes. I'd like to see a simpler tax code. And so to that extent, I think, those are tax increases in the sense if you closed every loophole, a lot of people's taxes would go up. But that is where my tolerance for this ends. I think that if we do increase taxes in an attempt to balance the budget, we won't balance the budget. We'll just spend more. I just think we have such a clear track record on this. And while I totally get that when you look at this with your math eyeballs, that looks like a reasonable thing to do, I think you need to be looking at it with your politics glasses on, and then you can see that it's not going to do a damn thing.
Well, I think there's a politics argument for raising taxes to coincide with spending, and that argument is the one that was made by William Niskanen, who was a vice president, senior person at the Cato Institute for a very long time, and his argument basically was if you have deficit spending, that's spending that isn't paid for by taxpayers, then taxpayers don't feel the full brunt of that spending. government seems cheaper and therefore you get more of it. And so deficit spending fuels the growth of government under this theory. And look, this is a hard thing to test. It's a hard thing to know, but I don't think that's a crazy way of thinking about deficit spending. And if you think that way, then maybe you should say every time you're going to spend more on something, you have to raise a tax accordingly.
I do think also, this gets us back to the first question, which is income tax withholding is a big part of this question. So Milton Friedman did a lot of good things. One bad thing he did was figure out this cool plan where the IRS takes some of your income before you even see it. It never shows up in your paycheck. It just goes right to the government. That really, really undercuts the Niskanen people should see the cost of government. They should feel the cost of government. They should see it coming out of their checks. This, I think, is a case for the thing that I would substitute for income taxation in many cases, which is a consumption tax. People can, pay per purchase and pay on things that they purchase. I like it.
Does that function like a sales tax?
Right. So it's essentially a sales tax, although it can be constructed slightly differently. I know that it is a deeply annoying thing about living in the United States that something says it's $5 and then they ring you up at the register and it's actually $5.75 and you don't know why. But I think it's great that from the Niskanen point of view, every single time you buy something, it's annoyingly taxed right in front of your eyes. I would like to see that be more true of income. And so to that extent, I agree. Like, let's have taxes be more visible. I just think unless we reduce the mechanisms whereby we can continue to take on debt, we'll do that. And there's just be always like, yes, and it's a horrible improv comedy way of handling the nation's finances.
So both of the questions that we got are fundamentally practical questions about what we do with the reality of the government that we have, right? Like, we're going to have a government. Maybe we should tax it maybe we should fund it with an income tax. We have a giant deficit. Maybe that means that taxes need to go up. But what I want you to do for me is take us back. Like, give us a picture of a better world. Give us the Katherine world. Okay, maybe not full Katherine, because I know you're an anarchist, but like, what is the ideal libertarian tax system?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one that distorts behavior the least. I think it is the sheer numbers, right? Like, some stuff that should be mine, the state takes, and that sucks. That's the sort of taxation is theft argument, and I'm very, very sympathetic to it. But the thing I actually care about more is, like, I want people to do what they want to do, as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And those may not be the things I would do. They may not be the things you would do, Peter.
Like improv comedy?
Like improv comedy. But I still think that it is just the most important thing when you're thinking about how to construct a state is how do you distort people's behavior as little as possible. And so to me, that means you have to build, you have to think about the size and scope of government, but you also have to build your methods of taxation around not disincentivizing quote unquote bad behavior. And I get it. Even some libertarians will say, like, well, listen, if we have to tax something, why don't we tax something that incurs costs like smoking? That's as long as there is government health care, then why not use the tax system to try and minimize the burdens on that system? To me, that's just very much a two wrongs make a right argument, and I can't get on board with it.
It also doesn't work the way that it's supposed to.
That's important
so that
too.
At least, yeah. So it was one of the Western states, and I'm not going to say which one because I don't want to be wrong, but there was at least one state that basically imposed a smoking tax. It's a little bit more complicated than a smoking tax. It was a fee on the big tobacco producers, but it functioned like a smoking tax, and they used it to fund their public health programs. And then people started smoking an awful lot less. And there was a lot less revenue that came from this. And they were like, we can no longer fund our government on bad behavior because we stopped the bad behavior. And so, again, this goes back to the question that I think we talked about on the full roundtable this week about taxation can sometimes be used as regulation. And it also goes to your point that what you want is taxation that does not distort behavior, but simply is a kind of clean tax that funds the government.
Yeah. And spending distorts behavior too, right? Every subsidy is a behavior distortion. Every government grant is a behavior distortion. And so that is, to me, it's the exact same logic. If you want to reduce the kind of burden of the government on people, yes, you need to reduce taxes. Yes, you need to reduce regulation, but also you just need to reduce straight up spending. The amount of money that the feds in particular are dumping into people's private affairs becomes incredibly distortionary. And I think you can see that in everything from the Harvard controversy, in which the Trump administration and Harvard have been at war over not just tax benefits, but also research funding and student loans and a million other things, because all those are places where behavior is distorted by spending and or taxation. And so I think that's an example, but you get it absolutely everywhere. You get it in how many miles people drive their cars. You get it in what kind of cars they buy. You get it in people's home purchases. People buy houses because of the mortgage interest rate deduction. And I don't think that reflects a true underlying appetite for how much house people want to buy and how much mortgage they would like to hold. It's just
now we've discovered your private affairs here, right? This is
my private affairs are rent forever, and I will fight everyone on that. But I don't care what other people do. I just don't want them to do stuff because the federal government is goofing up their incentives.
All right. So final question, which is also about your private affairs. Since I have mentioned several times that you are philosophically an anarchist deep in your robot black heart, does that really mean no taxes at all? Like what happens in your ideal world?
Sure. So there are all kinds of ways to collectively fund things voluntarily. And I think sometimes when people hear anarchists, they hear a lot of different things, including like Molotov cocktails and berets, which is not my kind of anarchist. But
different cocktails, but maybe
different. I want like I would like a Suderman cocktail and purple hair, I guess. But the thing that you can do, for example, is what we do in all kinds of other areas of life now, which is you get people together in whatever unit makes sense. They voluntarily give money and then they get collective benefits. This is how we do, I don't know, health insurance. This is not a crazy idea. This is something that you can see. I know no one loves their HOA, but the fact is that HOAs mimic many of the functions of municipal governments and do it without the threat of force. And I think that that's important. I think we should value that more than we do. And I think the idea of, but where will the money come from to do things together is in some ways kind of purposely disingenuous. We gather up piles of money to do things together all the time. By the way, we also do that using market mechanisms. And I think that's an underappreciated way to get a lot of this stuff done as well.
What if government was just one big HOA is your answer here?
I wouldn't phrase it like that exactly if I were making my main best pitch, but also yes.
All right, I guess that's where we're going to end. Thanks for watching Table for Two. You should also subscribe to our YouTube channel and check back regularly for more bonus segments like this one. If you'd like us to answer your question, send your short, succinct, pithy, and not very long query to podcasts@reason.com. That's podcasts@reason.com. Thank you so much for watching.